This is More Than Money with Mapalo Makhu, brought to you by Sasfin Wealth.
Welcome to More Than Money. I'm Mapalo Makhu, a personal finance columnist, and I love having money conversations that change people's perspective about finances. Why am I doing this podcast, you might ask? To talk about money. Not the paper stuff. I mean the baggage, the feeling, the emotional, heart-wrenching stuff. We find this conversation so uncomfortable to have, which is why on this podcast, I have decided to have this very difficult conversations. We are going to have some difficult discussions because better money conversations lead to better money confidence, and healthy money dialogue leads to healthy money decisions. Today, I have the absolute pleasure of interviewing John Smit, a legendary figure in the world of rugby. John is widely regarded as one of the greatest rugby players of all time, having captained the South African national team, the Springboks, to victory in 2007 Rugby World Cup. So today we'll be delving into how John manages his finances. Just give us a little bit of a background into your upbringing, your parents, were there conversations around money around the dinner table, or it was a subject that they did not visit?
In my house, money was quite a private affair. And I remember my dad was an engineer in the mining sector, and my mom was a school teacher, and we were privileged enough to have enough of everything. I never felt like we'd be struggling, but I had absolutely no idea what my dad earned or my mom earned. I had no idea how they invested or what they did. Now, in hindsight, having seen how they are going through their retirement, they possibly should have done more. So perhaps they weren't discussing these things because it wasn't something that was prevalent on their minds when they were growing up and in their prime of their earning career. So I guess the difference lies, and I've got 3 kids, and for some reason, I don't know if it's a generational thing, I wasn't interested in what my dad or my mom earned. My kids are desperate to know how much I earn. I have taken a different approach with my kids and tried to educate them from a financial point of view as much as possible. And it's amazing, all 3 of them, while I have to exclude my 10-year-old, she's a little bit young still to quite grasp the effect, but between my 2 eldest, they've got very different approaches to finance and a very different view. One is super conservative and likes to save, and the other one likes to push a online button as well. So, but it is very different to how I grew up. But I had to sort of figure it out for myself. And I think the one thing that did help me a lot is I met my wife very young at school, and we started dating from matric. She became a CA and then got her master's in tax as well. So I would not say I'm the most financially sound person to talk to, but I certainly have been educated and have had someone on my side that has given me great advice along the way.
Now that you're a dad to 3 kids, do you teach them consciously about money, or is it perceived education? It's what they see around the household, how you and your spouse talk about money.
We are quite direct around money with the kids. So they get pocket money. So I've got 3 kids, 17, 15 and 10. My 17-year-old has probably got more responsibilities around the house because she's going to probably take a bit more care of the youngest. And so her pocket money value is dependent on how much she's doing outside of just her own personal life and her own chores. And then my son is pretty standard. He goes to boarding school, so he doesn't really need a huge amount of money. And the youngest, to be fair, that's a monthly donation. So it's a very small one for now. Well, what we do is I said to my kids about 4 or 5 years ago, when they started to become slightly more understanding of finances, I gave them a carrot to try and teach them about the advantages of escalation and interest. And I just said that whatever they can save in a year, I will double on Christmas Day. So come 25th of December, I double what they've been able to save during the year. So take, for example, my son, he gets a couple of $100 a month per pocket money. So the less he spends during the year on junk, the more he's able to double up. So he's been quite good, and he's starting to become a significant investment on Christmas Day every year. And it just allows them to be able to think twice about what they buy during the year. And the other thing that we always do as well is make them understand the costs of things. So going out for dinner and how not to take it for granted. I mean, we got a family of 5. It's very seldom you can get a meal at a restaurant for under 3,000 Rand. And then that's, so I want them to understand the sort of costs of things that are, so to speak, a spoil, So they have a very good understanding of what things cost, and they also have an understanding of the meaning of saving, which means they get to double their money. So I wish I had a bank that would double my money on Christmas Day.
That's a pretty good deal. So now, John, let's take it back to when you started your professional career. So you were very young, and at that point, you start making a bit of money. What were some of the decisions you were taking around that time when it came to your finances?
Without doubt, I tell you, I made terrible decisions. So to put into perspective, I think, if I remember correctly, my first contract at the Sharks was 2,300 Rand a month. Now, bearing in mind, I was a university student at Pietermaritzburg University. 2,300 Rand a month was a pretty good amount of money. And I love telling the story, but I spent 2,258 Rand in my first month on a sound system for my car. It's amazing. You get access to money at a young age, and it's just so easy to make stupid decisions. If I think about my first 5 years of income, which escalated significantly as I got higher and higher in the sort of rugby world, and my contracts grew. I think the only decent investment I made in the first 5 years of earning money was a house. I bought a house, and in those days, are we now talking late 90s, early 2000s, the property market was still quite a good one to be involved with. So that managed to save me quite a bit from some of the silly decisions I made. We did a bit of property development and buying and selling at that stage, so that also helped. But at the same time, I also invested in a cafe, which was a disaster. I also invested in the motor industry, cars, which is a passion of mine, which is also a disaster.
Yeah.
And I thankfully made all of these stupid decisions before the age of 25. So, I was able to sort of curb those errors. And I guess it's spending your money on passions. And by 25, I sort of we really realized that there was only a very short-term income revenue stream coming from rugby. And I probably at best had another 10 years. So I then, obviously, my wife had moved, then we'd gotten married, and then sort of kids started to become, and once you start thinking about a family and kids, you sort of have to think quite carefully about where you spend your money. So that's sort of where things started to really, I guess, unfold from an investment point of view. Was at 25, I started to really understand the value of income and the importance of planning around that as well.
So now your wife had already qualified as a CA at that point?
Yeah, absolutely. So she started in Tux, and she finished her degree there, and then she got her honours at the University of Natal. Then we got married at the age of 27. She was pretty savvy all along the way. I would probably say that I didn't listen as well until I got to about the age of 25. She's really careful, very unlike most wags. She doesn't like to spend, and she doesn't go crazy in a mall. So that certainly has helped us be able to be, I guess, in a better position one day.
So what were the conversations around money with your wife when you first got married?
It was always a discussion. And to be fair, I mean, from a young age, we were always very open about finances. And she also earns a significant amount of money. So it was always been an open cards affair. So it was always around making decisions and how we were going to spend the money and where we were going to put it. Budgets is something that rugby players or sports people in general are terrible at doing. And so it's funny, and I'm generalizing, but it's funny how few people that you speak to actually know what goes off their account every month. So it actually does a budget, actually understands what their car and their house and their cell phone and a basic budget. I would say less than 10% of people that I've come across actually have an idea of what their monthly debit orders are and what their monthly costs are. And that's sort of the one thing that we sort of started to really quantify was, all right, I'll give you a great example. We moved back from Saracens after retiring from rugby at the age of 35, and I went into my role as the CEO of the Sharks. Now, the disparity between rugby money and the real world, my salary as the CEO of the Sharks was probably a quarter of what I was earning in my last year of rugby. And it's still yet to just put me in a high LSM group here in South Africa. But come 3-4 months, we had this big house that cost money. We had these cars, and eventually we were still living our lives on a budget of what we were earning. And we've both had to sit down after 3 months and say, okay, well, the house is actually too big. It's too costly. And this was our dream home that we'd built and spent stupid money on. And we eventually just realized that it just wasn't going to work. So we sold our house. We bought a lovely house, half the price, and lived very happily there for 5 years and managed to keep our costs in check.
How important is that realization that you know what, our income is not what it used to be, and making that decision to say, you know what, let us move to something that can accommodate our budget right now?
Well, I think that was the most important thing. And I tell you why it's the most difficult adjustment to make, because men have got such big egos that to admit that you have to downgrade, or you can't get the latest iPhone, or you're going to drive the same car for 10 years because you haven't had an increase at work, or maybe you've been retrenched and gotten a new job that doesn't pay the same, or in our case, earned 25-30% less than what you did a year before. A lot of people find that some kind of social unacceptance, but the sooner you realize that, the better, because the longer you hold on, the deeper and darker the hole gets that you create for yourself. I certainly didn't want to avoid my wife or avoid my friends' embarrassment by telling them that I was now earning less and I had to change my lifestyle. I quickly addressed the situation, but it is, I think, one of the biggest risks to everyone out there, because socially we think we can't admit that we've gone sort of backwards financially. But the reality is most people who do that are better off than what most of their friends are, who are drowning themselves in debt because they are getting in less than what they're spending.
I think it's such an important message that also you send to your kids. What do you think that would be the lesson for them in the future?
That lesson, amongst every other talk on finances we have with them, whether it's a meal at a restaurant, or how many times you eat at a restaurant, or the cost of a car, don't ever engage yourself in a financial commitment monthly that you can't afford. Don't spend more than you've got. And I mean, it sounds like such a simple thing, but it's such an easy thing to lose track of. You upgrade your phone and it's extra $200 a month, and then you get a new car and it's extra $2,000 a month. And then all of a sudden, by the 22nd of the month, you're starting to go into the red. And so it's a simple rule, and I wish I'd been taught it from a young age, but my kids have to understand, you don't spend what you don't have.
You are listening to More Than Money, a podcast collaboration brought to you by Sasfin Wealth. At Sasfin Wealth, we empower our clients to reach their global investment goals, to retire with dignity, and to leave a lasting legacy. If you would like to have real money conversations, visit sasfin.com/wealth and talk to us. Enjoy the rest of the podcast.
Now, athletes often face a unique financial challenge after retiring from professional sports. How did you prepare for your financial future during the time when you were playing professional rugby?
Athletes, I think, do have quite a significant challenge in terms of transitioning into the real world. And I think it's because, and I speak specifically for rugby, you do earn a significant amount of money at a young age for a short period of time. So let's say if you're lucky, you make your professional debut at 19 and you peak at 35. Some guys are playing longer, but you've got about a 10-year gap to earn as much money as possible. And the seduction of the money is the more you earn, the bigger you want your house to be, the faster you want your car to be. And so the key really is to be able to think about two things. What are you going to do when you can't play rugby? And how long is your money going to last? And how much have you saved so that length of period can be as long as possible? Because I can tell you right now, there's only a very, very small handful of rugby players who've been able to earn enough money to be able to sit at home and drink coffee and play golf. That's a very, very small percentage. So the difficulty comes in when you transition out of earning X amount of rands per month and then coming into the real world and realizing you've actually got to accept far less. And now all of a sudden you haven't paid off your house, you haven't paid off your car, and this pressure starts to get bigger and bigger every month. So all I try to do was make sure that we had enough from a simple things like a retirement annuity. These are simple things that you can start when you're 19, 20 years old. Investing, diversifying some of your investments by taking a few policies that are, I guess, not aggressive, but conservative, and play in the property portfolio overseas and in the dollar space and obviously in foreign currency. But these are things that you've got to do by building a relationship with maybe an investment manager, with a guy that's got a track record or someone that you know and can trust, and then start to use them as sounding boards as well for where you should be going and where you can spend your money on a monthly point of view.
Now, you played overseas for a couple of years. How did you manage your finances compared to when you were here in SA?
I find it a lot easier to manage my life overseas. I played in France and I played in London. There's far less things to spend money on. And I say that with respect, but like take, for example, our last 2 years in England. We didn't have to worry about a medical plan. We didn't have to worry about schooling. We didn't really have to worry about those kinds of costs. Whereas here, your medical aid, your schooling plays quite a big role. And over there, there were two big expenses that I didn't really have to worry about. So, and the other thing is in the UK, you need a small little car that just does the job, and there your big expense will be property. So whether you rent or you buy,
Yes.
I found life from a financial point of view a lot easier to manage. And also, at the time, and it's certainly not like that anymore, but I mean, at the time we were getting house mortgages at 1.75%, which is quite different to the kind of interest rates that we pay here. So probably a lot easier to be a home owner and more affordable because of the low interest rates. I think those interest rates are now over 5% considering what's happened to the world in the last 2 or 3 years. So when I was abroad, I actually found life slightly easier to manage from a financial point of view.
So now let us just go back to one of the biggest mistakes you've made financially. Do you recall what it was?
I would probably say investing in a restaurant. I was young and it looked like a cool thing to do, and it's the old cliche of every rugby player opens up a coffee shop. We opened up a franchised restaurant, and the mistake possibly wasn't, because it was a successful franchise, the mistake wasn't possibly opening up. The mistake was spending the money, buying the franchise, setting up the restaurant, and then not managing it firsthand. Hospitality industry is not for the faint-hearted. I subsequently did get into a partnership with a friend in a restaurant who ran it himself, and he was brilliant, and the restaurant ran like clockwork. But when you have a manager that runs a restaurant remote control and you popping in for the odd meal every now and again is probably the easiest way to lose your money.
Yeah, it's a complete disaster. So now you are a businessman. How do you select which types of businesses to go into?
Businessman sounds so formal. I am in business. We have a services company. So we almost service the corporate world, but we're not corporate world. So we do private security, facilities and cleaning. And so we're in the services industry. To be remiss to say that I'm in the corporate world. We service the corporate world. In terms of businesses that I would like to get involved in, it just depends. A lot has to do with the person either presenting the opportunity or running the opportunity. One of the best bits of advice I got about who to invest with, you don't invest in businesses, you invest in people. And that for me is paramount. It doesn't have to be an exciting, colorful business idea. It just has to have someone behind it that is got skin in the game and is massively committed to the cause succeeding.
You spoke briefly about, the types of insurances, retirement annuities. How important is it for athletes to have insurance, for example, income protected, because you could possibly get hurt?
It is very important. It's also quite difficult to attain. I mean, as a rugby player, there's not a lot of insurance brokerages out there that are wanting to insure players from getting career-threatening injuries. So I did it for a while. It's really, really expensive. So it's a difficult thing for a rugby player to be able to do successfully because it comes at a massive cost, obviously because of the high risk nature of the game. But it has saved a couple of guys in the past when there were active portfolios available. It's a very difficult thing to maintain. Currently in South Africa, all the players who are members of my players do have some form of protection depending on what their injury status is.
You are a role model for many, many people, especially for young athletes. What advice, specifically money advice, would you give them?
Wow, I wish I'd been given this advice, but I think when there's a 19-year-old making it and starting to get into the teams and starting to get a bigger contract every year, I think the advice is try and keep it as simple as possible for as long as possible. Don't overcomplicate your life with debit orders. If you can afford a R1 million car and get away with a 350,000 Rand car, try and limit those costs and avoid building debt early. That puts pressure on you from a monthly point of view. Those would be my key bits of advice.
Fantastic. And what is the best financial advice you've had so far?
Best financial advice, make sure that you invest with the right people and not necessarily the right business. So for me, I'm very careful as to who I get involved with. And then the other bit of advice is, again, rather avoid debt wherever possible and save your money. So I'll give an example. I love cars and I've wasted an inordinate amount of money on cars as a youngster. But what I should have done is look at a car that I liked that was affordable to buy without finance and driven that for 5, 6, 7 years. And while I was driving that, spend what I would have spent on the car that I wanted and just put it aside into a fund that escalated with some kind of growth and then bought the car that I wanted in 5 years' time.
Or alternatively, what could happen is at the end you think to yourself, goodness, that's quite a lot of money for me to be giving away towards a car. That's also an option.
I've got lots of sense in me, but when it comes to cars, I've got very little.
Well, at least you know your vice. So what financial goals do you still have for your future?
They have changed as we've evolved and as we've gotten older. And I think for me, I really want to be in a position. I'm 45 years old. I reckon my next 10 years is probably the sort of earning peak. And, I'd like to be in a position at 55 to be able to make individual decisions about what I do, where I live, and how I work. And if I can get to that position in 10 years' time, then my wife and I will be really happy. So I think one thing about that goal is that the flip side of it is that I don't want to be in a position at 65 where I'm desperately trying to squeeze out another salary because I haven't got enough to be able to get me through my retirement.
What are some of your fears that you still have about money, if you have any at this point?
My fears are that this rand of ours is going to become worth very little, and all the hard work I've spent on collecting them is going to go to nothing. So I do worry about our currency. I guess it is possible to hedge it with foreign currency, but that also has been limited in terms of what you can send overseas. So we just have to hope that somehow our currency remains intact.
What do you hope for when it comes to your children?
I've told my girls to marry rich. If I don't have to worry about their financial status, that certainly would be a blessing.
For someone, again, who is looking at you and you're a role model, and the temptations are real, right? The cars, the flashy houses. How does one take themselves out of that pressure, put their head down, and take on the advice that you have just given? Because remember, at the age of 20, 21, someone telling you about retirement annuity, about policies, that can sound quite boring. How does one truly just build that foundation for themselves as a young athlete?
It's a tricky question to answer because I think a lot of it comes down to the fact that I don't have the perfect history in terms of financial management. I've spent money on silly things. I do love a great car. And I do think that if you are earning money, you also must experience that reward. You must obviously enjoy the things that you enjoy if you are working hard and earning the right kind of money. I think the reality is that you must always just have a good feel and perception of what your money status is. And if you feel like you have to live in a certain way, then you need to reconsider the kind of people that you're surrounding yourself. So the way you treat money, I think, has a lot to do with the kind of company that you keep and the people that you've chosen. If you feel there's a pressure to keep up with the Joneses, you need to reassess your social crowd. But if you feel comfortable to downgrade your car or live in a different suburb and still have the same friends with the same reaction, or have friends that support you in that, then you're probably in the right space.
So, John, obviously, as a sportsman, there are quite a lot of endorsement deals that come your way. How did you manage those?
The one thing about them is that they were not consistent, so you couldn't bank on the income. It would be sort of an ad hoc, I guess, cream that would come in on an annual basis, and some years would be good and some years would be bad, or not as good. But it really was such an inconsistent manner of income that it was something that I excluded completely from my budgeting purposes. And so it always just went into a separate account and sort of sat there for, I guess, as a bonus ball back in the day. And every now and again, if we wanted to make a change to the house or add a room or fix a kitchen, it's sort of that would be where that money went. But it wasn't, in our day, it wasn't a big enough thing to be able to factor into our financial planning.
What do you splurge on? We've spoken about the serious stuff. What do you actually splurge on besides cars?
So cars, definitely. But although I think I've gotten myself into a space with cars now where I have a very specific taste and I buy stuff that escalates in value, so older stuff. So the cars, I think my wife slightly calmed down around how much money goes into cars because there is actually some kind of return once they age a little bit. Yeah. Splurges, I love the bush. I love eating out, and I love buying good red wine.
John, thank you so much for sharing all the invaluable insights and for the wisdom as well. Thank you so much.
Pleasure.
This was a Sasfin Wealth podcast. Visit sasfin.com/wealth for more information.